Hello, and welcome to the Sunday stream. I'm happy you're here. Thanks for being here. Today, I'm going to talk about, among other things, this crazy new old book I got. Isn't that a compelling spiral if you ever saw one? And just to catch you guys up in general with how things are going and what direction they're moving in. So, has it been a week for you? It's been a weird week for me. All last week or all this week, I kept thinking that it was the wrong day, like literally every day. At some point in time, I didn't realize what actual day it was, and fun and exciting, especially when people are counting on you to do some things. Oddly, it worked in my favor some of the days, and it worked against me in others. It's neither here nor there. So yeah, I got this new book, and one of the things that I find fascinating about it, not the least of which, is what good condition it's in for how old it was. It was printed in 1956, but there are forewords, and you can see that they are written by a psychologist, an obstetrician, and a dentist. So I think that means that they have had people using hypnosis for dentistry, birthing, mental conditions with success. Otherwise, why would they bother to write forwards for these things? And I think that that's sort of interesting. Here's a quick overview, of the authors. And the guy on top has written a book about the art of sex, so wonder what this book is going to bring us. I think that these old hypnosis books are really fascinating in one way, and that is that they show how things were done, and they talk about the particular types of ailments that somebody might have gone to see a hypnotist for. And these particular ones include things like insomnia, headache, constipation, reducing, which I'm pretty sure is weight loss, stopping smoking, excuse me, hypnotic anesthesia, which is really, really great for surgery, painless childbirth. So there's the obstetrician course, hypnosis in dentistry, working with children, self-confidence, self-consciousness, getting rid of fright, being internally aware. So those are some pretty still well-used things for hypnosis right now. So this book and others like it have been a basis for people to do some general, generic hypnosis over the years. And I don't mean necessarily that they're super generic, but they have come to be the things that people are most likely to seek out a professional hypnotist for. Obviously, this is not a recreational hypnosis book, but it does include some interesting things that I think still have relevance today. So, for example, I'm going to talk about needles for just a second. So if that's not for you, feel free to turn away. But I occasionally help people who are going into surgery get over a fear of needles, because sometimes what that means is that they're going to have a lot of blood work done, or they're going to have to get a lot of shots, or they might have to have an IV line or something put in. And if you can get somebody to the point where they are unafraid of needles, it can be far less anxiety and stress inducing to go into that surgery. You can also address the surgery itself specifically, but just needles in general is a thing that a lot of people have a fear of. So when they were talking about the anesthesia, one way that I help people to get over the fear of needles is by showing them a bunch of needles and talking about what each type of needle might do, because they come in all sorts of different thicknesses and lengths. And then I usually anesthetize with hypnosis the back of someone's hand. And and I will put a needle in when the back of their hand doesn't feel anything. And this is not the way it normally happens in the doctor's office, right? Like, they don't care if you're going to feel the pain or not. They're like, oh, you'll feel a little pinch when you go get a shot of something. It's not always that way when you go get surgery. Like, they don't care. They have a job to get done, so they're not out there mindful of your feelings. So if you can anesthetize the back of someone's hand, you can show them, you can put a needle in, you can show them that there's a needle in there. Maybe you can have them watch the needle going in. They can feel that there isn't any pain. And you can give them a self-trigger so that they can, like, say something to themselves like, anesthetize this spot. They just, like, draw little circles until their brain goes, okay, we're going to anesthetize that spot so you can, give us the drugs or whatever it happens to be, draw blood until you don't feel it anymore. It can be far less stress-inducing, and stress is a bad indicator for how people are going to respond and heal after a surgery, which is why when Dr. James Braid was in India doing a lot of tumor removals, among other things, he and his assistants would, like, lie somebody down, and they would pass, like, leaves, branches over them again and again and again until they fell into a deep state of trance, and they would check. They would see if they, were going to stay there. And they did this a lot of times without speaking, because different castes in India often had different languages, and so one group of people would not necessarily understand another group, but the unconscious is universal. So if you can get your unconscious self to fall into a trance, or somebody's unconscious to fall into a trance, they're not going to have those same, oh, I'm really anxious, I'm really fearful, I'm really afraid, and no needles, right? So nothing to worry about. So people would go into this state of trance, they would be operated on, they would leave them in that state of trance, because this was all pre-anesthesia. They didn't have ether. They didn't have other drugs. And so they would just use this, hypnotize them. And he wrote a pretty interesting book about that, although it's more of a, this is what happened to who, and this is how they presented themselves. So it's a little bit more cut and dried, but it's still pretty interesting. I don't remember if he wrote it or if he sent this information to his brother, who I think was also a doctor up in Scotland, and his doctor brother wrote the book. But his name is James Braid. If you're interested in it, you can get a copy of that book and make it available, and look it up. So anyway, general anesthesia is pretty cool, and it's one of the things that in recreational hypnosis you might do at an event, with permission, of course, with consent, where you, like, put your hand out, you go to shake somebody's hand, and you do this. I'm going to show you what it looks like when I do it. This is what I have taken away from reading Milton Erickson, and then Richard Bandler sort of took it over, and he did it a little bit differently. But from what I've understood, Milton Erickson would take your hand, and he would, like, go back and forth with these two fingers on, down the side of your hand, and he would also, like, tap with his middle finger. So they would call it ambiguous touch, right? So it's definitely not the sort of thing that most people are expecting when they get a handshake from somebody. And it came to a point where the other psychiatrists in the mental hospitals that he was working in would not shake his hand, because some of them would be left with cataleptic arms until it wore off. Isn't that fun? Some of them would be left with an anesthetized hand, because sometimes if I do it to somebody, some people automatically get, like, not just a cataleptic hand, but they do get an anesthetized hand too, where you can't really feel it, and you can do all sorts of fun things with it. Like, you can shake one hand, and then you can say, okay, now I'm going to transfer that same thing to this hand, and then this hand starts to feel or responds in the same way. And that's super cool. Hello, everybody. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different kind of hypnotic handshakes. So, like, I would say that is the OG. That's the original hypnotic handshake that Milton Erickson used to do. Richard Bandler did this one where he's, like, going to shake your hand, and then instead of, like, shaking your hand, he grabs you by, like, the wrist and the your elbow, and he, like, moves it so it's like this, and he just gives it a gentle push on the wrist, and then when it touches your forehead, you fall deeply into trance. So that's another one. There's another one where it's not quite a handshake, but you put your hand down, or the hypnotist puts their hand up, you press down on their hand, and they pull their hand away and say sleep. And you could see my body movement. So sometimes people will literally do that fall into trance thing. And there's a whole bunch of other kinesthetic type of inductions that you can do that literally involve a sensation of dropping or falling. And they're pretty cool. And they really can, especially for people who are new to hypnosis, can allow you to experience a sensation that is unlike any other, at least as far as I'm concerned. And I love roller coasters, and I love that kind of dropping sensation. One of the first times someone hypnotized me, like I'd been hypnotizing them, they hypnotized me, and so I'm just standing right next to them, and like out of nowhere they said sleep, and I went right into their shoulder, like I just dropped, and it was so cool. So like I don't have a lot of hypnotic subject experiences, but I do really like the experiences that I've had as a subject for the most part. One thing, guys, don't be creepy. Stop telling women what they're going to do that isn't something you've talked about, because that has happened to me, unfortunately, more than once, but my brain just shuts that shit down. I'm not here for that. So if you want to do hypnosis stuff, cool. Leave everything else aside. That's my personal feeling about that. If you want to pre-negotiate something with somebody, that's excellent. If you don't do it. Okay, so those are probably, there's definitely additional handshakes that are out there, but those are some super cool ones. And if I ever have the opportunity to film outside of my little box with somebody else, I will see if we can do a whole bunch of different handshake inductions and show you what those are like, because they're fun. They're fun to watch, and I think that there's something, I mean, I think it's more fun to experience them, but I think it's, and to do them, but I think it's also fun to watch those happen. So, anyway, oh yeah, so I was talking about anesthesia and how that, can come from the handshake. And then I think that one of my favorite triggers, so like I have 3 favorite triggers, and one is to stop somebody in place. One is to bring them back into trance in an instant, and the other makes them feel like they've gotten a hug. So like those are some that I use all the time. And the third one I do only because I'm always typing winky smiley faces. Someone was like, is that a trigger? I was like, no, so I made it one. But the other 2, stopping in place and being able to drop instantly into trance, are super helpful. I also have another one where I say to someone silence, and then they can't speak, and sometimes that's fun too. Be that as it may. Hi everyone that's here. I just want to say thank you for coming back. Thank you for coming here the first time. Lovely to see you. Yeah, stopping in place, right? It's absolutely one of my favorite things. But the nice thing about stopping somebody in place is that you can do it either with a trigger, or you could do it with a handshake. Like, what if you shook somebody's hand and then like tap the back of their hand, and is like, and you notice that all the sensation is starting to leave, and you can't move your hand, and then all of a sudden you realize that it's just spreading to every other part of your body really quickly, and you can't move at all anymore. And then all of a sudden your unconscious mind just like is going to drop you deeply into trance right now, because you're in, I talk about, and so I'm going to go over this spiel with you. I say something along the lines of, when you are stopped in place, that is already an altered state. Your unconscious mind is paying attention. It is holding you immobile. So from that state of just being immobile and conscious, it's really easy for you to go from immobile and conscious to immobile and unconscious, and you can do that now. And so that's one way that I might have somebody go into a state of trance from being stopped in place. And I want to talk about something else. I will go back to freezing in place because there's all sorts of fun things. Thanks for being here, Mike. There's all sorts of fun things you can do, obviously, when somebody is stopped in place. But I want to talk about what I call persistence in hypnosis. So if you are, for example, wide awake and somebody triggers you with a hypnotic trigger, or you are deeply in trance and somebody uses a trigger and then wakes you up, or if you're awake and they put you into a trance, your unconscious mind should be able to hold the state of that trigger from one state to the other, right? That makes sense, right? So if you are, for example, stopped in place and then you are triggered to go deeply into trance, you should still be in that state of immobility. And conversely, if you are deeply in trance and somebody stops you in place, you should be able to wake up and still be immobile. So that's what I call persistence. And so in my mind, at any rate, maybe not in everybody else's, so sometimes people think, oh, I'm going to get woken up. When I'm woken up, I don't have those things going on. Not true. Your unconscious mind should go, oh, the trigger is still in effect because I haven't taken it off yet. And when you find yourself in that state, I think it makes the impact of hypnosis a little bit more profound. And if you're new to hypnosis, a lot of times I talk about this, but a lot of times people want a convincer of some sort. And I think that there is almost nothing more convincing than having a trigger that does a thing happen when you're in trance and is still going on when you come out. And then you're like, holy cow, like on that conscious level, you're like, what the fuck is going on? What has just happened to me? What is that like? So let your unconscious mind think about those concepts, the concept of persistence and the idea that you can hold on to whatever it is that you're doing, and that can be a really fun convincer. Again, this is presuming that everything you're doing is safe and appropriate, that you have consented to be played with in these ways or to, be experimented with in these ways. And I don't ever use that as a derogatory term, because it's really important that you understand what you're capable of making happen. So in that sense, like if I was going to do something to myself, that would be an experiment too. So I want to just make sure that I'm using that term purely as we're going to do this thing, we're going to test it out, and we're going to see what happens. This is what we're expecting. Is that what we get? Suggestibility progression through time. So are you saying something like somebody is given a suggestion to do a thing, and then instead of it being the same or stronger over time, it weakens over time? Because, for example, if I am doing stop smoking hypnosis with somebody, I expect that they are going to not smoke again. Now, does that mean that that is an impossibility? No, but there are, and I say that because human beings are put in different and stressful situations all the time, right? And so it can be, depending on how the suggestions were given, it can be, especially with food and exercise stuff, because those are things that, one, we do every day, two, we sometimes do on a condition of how much time we have to get to that thing. And so if those things get interrupted, like if our time schedule gets interrupted and we only have so many food options, that can be a dieting disruptor, for example. If you go to exercise and you do it every day, for example, but say you were in a car accident or something else happened, some disruption of your day and you could not make it that day, how likely are you to get to go back again the next day and the next day and the next day? So yes. So can you increase suggestibility in a long term? Oh, you absolutely can increase suggestibility. So first of all, I talk about this a lot, but I'm going to talk about it again because I love it. It is important for you, for most people at any rate, to thank your unconscious mind for doing a good job. The more you do that, the more you thank your unconscious mind for doing a good job, the more you thank your unconscious mind for learning a thing, the more you appreciate that your unconscious mind has skills that you have not yet tapped into, the more likely your unconscious mind is going to be to want to show you what a good job it can do at getting better and better at taking those suggestions in and at making them work really powerfully, really strongly. So let's talk about that for a second. Let's go back to our favorite stop and play suggestion, right? So I will do a stop and play suggestion. I will do it a bunch of different ways as well, because how the suggestion is phrased can help determine the way in which you as an individual interpret it and the way in which you as an individual respond to it. So I already talked, I think last week, about using your different senses, and we're going to do that again because why not? So if I say to you, okay, when I count to 3 and snap my fingers, you're going to not be able to move, right? That's pretty basic. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. So now you're stopped in place, right? But what if you've never done that before? And what if you're only slightly suggestible right now? And what if you really want that to happen, but you're kind of the person that has to test it? And you test it and you can move, and then it all falls apart. So anyway, release, just in case you were stuck. So what happens if somebody then says something like, okay, when I count to 3 and snap my fingers, you're going to discover that every single part of your body begins to feel like it's turning to stone. It's going to begin to feel like it's turning to stone in such a way that you feel really immobile, really unable to move. Even if you were to try to move, if a rock was to try to move itself, it's not going to go very far. It needs something else in order to move it. A rock itself is going to stay exactly where you put it. Your brain is going to go, oh, well, we're just going to be a me-shaped rock. So when she counts to 3 and snaps her fingers, I'm going to feel like a me-shaped rock, and I'm not going to go anywhere. And even if you were to try to move, because of the way I've described it, you're going to find it very difficult until I say release to be able to move. So 1, 2, 3, feel that suggestion take place, feel yourself turn into a rock, and feel the way that your body, even if you were to try to move it, just goes, oh no, okay, I can't move, I'm just going to stay right here, I'm just going to stay right here. Now, can a rock see, hear, speak? Maybe you can. Who knows? It was a U-shaped rock, so maybe it still has those abilities. Anyway, release. So maybe you notice that there was a difference between the first one and the second one. Maybe you notice no difference because you're either so good at hypnosis that both worked really well, or you're so not good at hypnosis yet that it didn't work, neither one worked very well at all. However, adding in a suggestion like, and from now on, every single time that you are told to stop in place, your unconscious mind just gets better and better at knowing what that means. It gets better and better at controlling all your muscles, all your tendons, any small twitches or movements that you might have made before. Your unconscious mind just goes, nope, we're going to shut those down. We're going to hold you exactly like a rock. In fact, every single next time you do it, you're going to feel more and more U-shaped rock-like, until at some point in time, your unconscious mind is going to be so good at holding on to that suggestion that when you are stopped in place, you are immobile, that's just what happens. As long as it's safe and appropriate to do so, as long as you've consented to doing that, that's what's going to happen. Yeah, right? It's nice to let your brain be as lazy as you want. So the hypnotist should take things into consideration. Now, again, not everybody is going to need this. But a lot of people are going to find that the more the suggestion is tailored, like especially what can be, so there are some people who really love to find loopholes, right? So if you're a person who really loves to find a loophole, when you find a loophole, you need to tell your hypnotist about it so that they can then destroy that loophole, like essentially, right? You should be able to, no matter what the suggestion is, have your unconscious mind get to that point where it's like, we're not just going on the letter of the law, but we're also going on the spirit of the law. So if the hypnotist says, this is what I want you to do, we're going to find all the ways in which we can make this happen. We're going to take all the ways in which we think we could get out of it, and we're going to allow us to build more of these that eat away at these, so that at some point in time, the only thing that's left is a super strong, bit of stuff in our brain that goes, no, it doesn't matter what the suggestion is. We are following the letter of the law. We are adding to the spirit of the law, and we're going to make damn sure that we make this suggestion happen as strongly and as powerfully as possible. So the more you do hypnosis, the better you're going to get at this. And that may not have exactly been your specific thing that's happened to you. Like, you may never have had any of those specific thoughts going on in your head, because they're my thoughts and they're coming from my head and I'm just sharing them with you guys. But the more that your brain does these things where you are like helping yourself to understand the suggestion, to buy into the suggestion, to do the suggestion, the more your unconscious mind is going to go, you know what? I can do that with any suggestion I please. I've talked before about accepting, rejecting, and adjusting suggestions, but use this as a like cohesive part of a whole, right? Because every suggestion that you find yourself accepting can be like an opening a doorway to another type of suggestion that you never thought that you were going to be any good at, that your unconscious mind can go, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. I have the ability to adjust things. So what if I said this? The hypnotist said this, but what if I adjust it to be this? And then I take this information that I learned about how I already do this other trigger and I put it together, and then bam, you're making that thing happen too. Because hypnotists, unfortunately, as much as sometimes we can play around at it, we really can't read your mind. So you are a unique and special blend of all of your experiences, and I am the same thing, but our experiences don't always allow our communication styles to like fully match and mesh up, right? If they do, cool, because every once in a while you're going to meet somebody who's had a life similar enough to yours or experiences similar enough to yours so that when you have a conversation, everything flows, right? It's like really simple, really easy. Everything just meshes and flows and goes super well. And then you'll meet other people and your conversational styles don't match up. Sometimes specifically Virginia Satir. So she was a family psychiatrist and she did a lot of group sessions with families. She noticed that, for example, somebody in the family would speak in terms of like what they had seen and the color of things, and somebody else would talk about how they felt and the way they experienced things, and somebody else might talk about what they had heard, right? So you're getting the three major eyesight, hearing, and your feelings, either emotionally or touch based outside ones. So your brain takes all of these three things, and if you are so firmly entrenched in one way of thinking about the world and somebody else starts talking about the other way that they think about the world, you might have a clash. But the more your brain realizes that you can use all of your senses, go ahead and use every sense that you have to do these things, you can increase the ability that you have to make a suggestion work for you in the strongest way possible. And that's what you want, right? Like you want to be able to have a suggestion that you can feel really good about. Like, I mean, I know that hypnotists talk a lot about how this suggestion or going really deeply into trance makes you feel good. Hypnosis is pleasure. You probably heard that before. And I'm not talking necessarily about sexual pleasure, although that is absolutely a super valid way for people to get to do things. But just in general, the more you can find yourself experiencing and enjoying the state of trance, the more you can discover what you're capable of doing. And that's really pretty amazing, right? Like, what are some things that people in here really would like to do better? Like, sometimes somebody wants to do something like procrastination. They want to stop procrastinating. They always do it. Why do they always do it? Why can't I just get this damn thing done, right? So, yeah, right? Pleasure really helps that for me. Pleasure, I've said this like a bazillion times in classes and stuff, but pleasure is like a gateway drug in hypnosis to getting somebody to do almost anything. It's sad but true. And that's because our brain works on a reward system, and pleasure is a reward that we all understand what that means. Like, we know what it's like to feel better. Even if you have lived a shitty life, there have unfortunately been, and I say unfortunately because we should all have more than this, but you've probably had moments of joy, of pleasure, of happiness, of something. And so our brain like gloms onto that. Our brain is like, yes, we want more of this. Unfortunately, this is why some people turn to drugs, because it gets them at least away from the situation that isn't really nice, right? But our brain really responds to pleasure super well. So if you can give somebody a suggestion, for example, that when you come in to your house or your room, you can start small, right? Maybe you just want to pick a room in the house. Like, so for example, like anytime you go into your living room, your unconscious mind automatically begins to have an idea of what you think this space really ought to look like. And you start to closely examine what the space does look like. And then your brain compares what it does look like with what you think it ought to look like. And then your unconscious mind gets this idea every time you think about what it should look like and gets a little rush of pleasure. And so every time you go in that room and it's not exactly what you think it should look like, your unconscious mind goes, oh, well, look, there's some dirty dishes here. Let's just go bring them into the sink. And then you come back into that room and you're like, oh, it's a little bit closer to what I envision when I go in that space. And then you get that little rush of pleasure because you've done this thing. And then you're like, oh, look, there's some dirty clothes here. I'm going to pick those up and put those in the laundry, or I'm going to put them wherever they need to go. And then you come back and the space looks a little bit more like you think it should look like. And then you get another little rush of pleasure. So you can keep doing this until your unconscious mind is forcing your conscious self to pick up so that your living room looks like exactly the way you want it to be every time you're in there. And you just automatically start doing these things. So it's not like you have to overcome procrastination. Your brain just prefers that space to look a certain way, and so you automatically do it. And you want to check, does it look that way when you come in the door? Does it look that way when you sit down in the chair that is your preferred chair? Now, you don't have to be like super pedantic about it, like you're having people over and you're like having a party or something, and every time you go in it looks a little bit different and you start spazzing out. There's always exceptions to every rule, right? You just want to make sure that you are doing the things that allow your brain to enjoy the space you're in as strongly as possible. And if giving you pleasure when you tidy up or clean up or vacuum or dust or sort or laundry or whatever it happens to be, until you get what it is that makes you happiest, what gives you that reward, it's going to just get better and stronger and easier to do over time, right? Yeah. Well, yes. Sorry, Mike, that's a hazard. I've definitely talked about that. So, but Cormac, it's going to feel so good to listen. So maybe you should just find one and listen to it. Yeah. So the nice thing about allowing your brain to get to that point where you have identified a thing that you want to do, and then, like, this was just me identifying a generic, general thing that might possibly happen, but you can think of a thing that you want to do too. So, like, not smoking feels better than smoking. Nothing about smoking begins to give you pleasure. So you can also take away the enjoyment of something, and then give you different things that you can enjoy instead, right? And because smoking is such an oral fixation, you want to make sure that you're not like eating a lot, because that's a common complaint that people have. Also, smoking can suppress your appetite. So, you know, maybe you're like, oh, I'm just going to have a big old glass of water, or maybe I'm going to chew a piece of gum. But I'm just going to realize that I don't need to have a cigarette in my mouth, and it feels better that way. And maybe you find yourself knowing that if it's dinner time and it's appropriate to put things in your mouth and eat, you do it. And otherwise, you're like, you know what, I feel better knowing that I don't have something in my mouth. So you can give pleasure for a thing. You can take pleasure away from a thing on certain circumstances, and to make it a little bit stronger too. So just for you. Oh, I have a new microphone, which hopefully you cannot see, but hopefully is better than the last one. I think the only thing I've recorded since I got it was the Mindless Banter podcast. We were up to number 7. Oh no, how terrible. She snapped at me. How dreadful. Oh, very, very dreadful. So hopefully, how very cruel. She just won't stop snapping. I know that sometimes people really like it when I snap. Let me talk about me and my snap journey. So when I first started doing hypnosis, I did not like snaps as a hypnotist. I didn't care to hear them as a subject. I didn't like them. I was like, I don't, like, there's nothing about the snap that's appealing to me. And then one day, something changed, because I realized that when I'm talking, when I'm recording, sometimes snapping feels like the right thing to do, and it helps to emphasize what it is that I'm saying without it being really obtrusive, right? It's just right there. I can do it and I keep talking, and it's super easy for my brain to snap and for me to just keep talking. So the other thing that's really nice about it is that you can absolutely use a snap as a kind of trigger, whether you're emphasizing the words that you're saying or whether you're actually setting a snap as a particular trigger for something. Your brain can do all of those different things. Thank you for all for being fuzzy. Thank you all for listening to me talk about these things. And so what if every time you heard a snap, it made you feel so amazing and it made it easier to write? Like, that's a thing that could happen. Your brain could just know that say your hands and your wrists and your forearms were unaffected by the snaps, but the rest of your body, can be as affected as you want to feel, but your hands just could write really easily anyway. Now, obviously, as you've seen, I do a lot of talking with my hands. You actually may not be able to see them because the camera only goes up so far. So for those of you who didn't come in until a little bit later, I'm going to show you this book again that I got and that I've been going through slowly. I just got it this week. So let's see if there's interesting things in here that I can share with you as passages from here. Oh, this is actually really fascinating. So this is a psychologist and a Mrs. J talking. And the psychologist says, we will have to correct some of your ideas. In the first place, when you're hypnotized, you don't go to sleep the way you do at night. It's more like the dreamy, relaxed, drowsy feeling that you may have on a vacation morning when you were awakened at your usual time and then realize that you don't have to get up. You snuggle back into the bed and enjoy a sensation of well-being. You hear the birds outside and other noises, but they don't mean very much to you. Perhaps you smell the bacon frying and the coffee cooking in the kitchen, but for the moment, you simply relax in peace and contentment. That sounds all right so far, doesn't it? As I was going through this book, just scanning it earlier, I noticed that they are kind of heavy on the relaxation conversation. Like, they talk about that a lot as though it's super important. And I get kind of testy, I guess, when I see professional hypnotists saying that hypnosis is relaxation. I think of it as a side effect, but I know damn well I can dance somebody or slap somebody or even, knee somebody in their body, causing pain. And I wouldn't say that any of those three things are particularly relaxing, but I can still put them in a trance doing that sort of thing. And I can still give them other suggestions while doing those things. And again, I think that relaxation can be a side effect, but it's not required. It's not necessary. I do not have any bacon for you. You'll have to go get your own. Hot tip, though, when I go get bacon, I get the pre-cooked kind, and I just keep in the fridge because I don't eat it all that much, and it's so messy, and I'd rather just microwave it. That's me, personally. Yeah, so I really like to give people suggestions when there's a huge conversation going on, maybe it has been going on, about how trance is unnecessary, which may be true, right? Like, you don't have to be in trance to accept a suggestion. People do it all the time. So that's fine. But I think that hypnosis works really well when people are in a state of trance, not only because hypnotists often tell people that the deeper they go, the better they feel, but also because there's something about their unconscious mind that often thinks, well, the deeper I go, the more I'm going to accept the suggestion. Now, I often say something like, no matter how deeply or lightly in trance you are, your unconscious mind is always going to hold you at the perfect place for my suggestions to be as powerful as they need to be for you to act on this now and from now on, or something like that. Right? So the way that our brains interpret these things is absolutely that you can be absolutely wide awake. One of my favorite stories is I had hypnotized somebody and they were in a waking state of trance. We're at a party. they are walking around talking to people. They are having hypnotic drinks, but they're having conversations with people. Nobody there can tell that they are in a trance. Not a single person there made a comment suggesting anything like that, or that their behavior was anything other than perfectly ordinary. And then the next morning, we are grocery shopping, and they're like, "Oh, I really have a headache." And I realized that even though I had woken them up at the end of the party, they had still been experiencing the hypnotic drinks suggestion, and I don't know how many that they had. Again, they were hypnotic drinks, but and so like we had to give them the suggestion that the hypnotic hangover could go away, which I think is kind of really, really interesting. So the unconscious just needs a suggestion to be input, whether you're wide awake or deeply in trance, and it will do the rest. And the nice thing is that, some people are like, "Oh, I have a watcher," which I don't have any problems with that. But, like, I think that it's important that we, as subjects, understand that we have the agency to do what it is that we want to do without doing the things that we don't want to do, right? So that we can say yes or no to things, that we can understand that, like, just because somebody gives a suggestion to us, that we are not obligated to accept it. It's important that you take your own personal well-being into consideration and do the things that are going to be good for you now and in the long run. I'm a big believer in that long run, whatever it means. But I'm pretty sure that if you do things that are good for you now, they should still be good for you later. So, yeah. That is really interesting. I think that having a suggestion, I'm going to read that out loud because I think that's really important. One time I was left in trance for the rest of the night and told I'd wake up from the trance in the morning as long as I was safe that evening, and then it took me a couple of hours the next day to realize that I didn't actually wake up from trance. Sometimes you do need a specific, explicit instruction. Sometimes that's just how people are, especially initially, like if you didn't realize that you were in a state of trance and you just woke up, and you could still be in that state of trance. That's that persistence that I was talking about, right? You're still in a state of trance, you've woken up, but you're still in a trance, and now you've got to come to consciousness. So, yeah, I mean, the guardrails that we have for doing trance, I think, are necessary because there are a lot of people out there who want to do some things to you that you may not necessarily want to do. I'm not saying that every hypnotist wants to do that, absolutely not. But I am saying that, like, we do have a much stronger consent culture right now. We do have a much bigger emphasis on subject agency right now. And I think that these things are important to talk about because as much as we love the idea of brainwashing, of mind control, of being hypnotized so that you don't have, any say in what goes on. Unfortunately, there are a lot of, the fantasy of that is super hot and exciting, right? But the idea that you don't have any control really gets the credit card companies quite in an uproar and in a tizzy. Like, they absolutely want to make sure that you have all the control. And so for hypnosis to pass by some of these things, you have to be able to turn it off and stop listening and come back to consciousness and have those suggestions that you may have already heard not stick. Yeah, so people really, really want to have the super sexy, super crazy suggestions, right? Like, I know because I get requests for them all the time. And people really want to be able to, they want. So Patreon passed some new restrictions, right? And so there's no longer the ability to, if you have like if you want to do something with tentacles, or you want to do something with a werewolf, or you want to do something with one of those bad dragon appendages, right? As long as a human is using those bad dragon things on you, you're fine. If a whole ass octopus is doing something to you or you to it, that's bestiality and they don't allow that. If you are doing something with, say, a werewolf who is like half switched, but definitely at least 51% human, that's fine. Otherwise, it's not fine. And otherwise, they just like go crazy. So, yeah, right? People love that idea, and it is a fantasy. And why can't we have fantasies about whatever the heck we please? Like, there are some absolute fantasies out there that you probably would not want to happen to you in real life. And most of the time, if you tried to recreate that, unless you were doing it like, honestly, I know this word seems antithetical when we're talking about, some of these things, but you need to do your terrible, terrible fantasies as carefully as you possibly can. You don't want somebody like, just because somebody has, say, expressed a passing fantasy interest in, like, say, the R word. I'm not going to say it because I think actually I swear enough, but I don't want YouTube to like cut me off. So if you just don't want somebody putting an ad in the paper, like it's happened before, saying, I'm looking for this kind of fantasy, just show up at my door, it's going to be open and you can do whatever you want, right? Like, that's not okay if the person who put the ad in is not the same person who wants that thing to happen to them. Like, you don't really want somebody else to do these things on your behalf when you have no idea, so you can experience something that is like so far beyond the pale. So it might be somebody's fantasy that they read about or they think about it and they find really hot, but there's little, yeah. Yes, I absolutely agree that there are a lot of things that you are not allowed to say anymore. Unfortunately, I don't say most of those things, but who knows? I'd rather just keep talking to you guys. So, and so there's a lot of, I'm going to put this behind a paywall, but the credit card companies don't want to take your money for those types of things, no matter how hot your content consumers may find it. Like, if you're a reader, if you watch videos or listen to audios, and there's like something that is described as your perfect sounding thing, but you can't buy it because, MasterCard is like, oh, absolutely not, that's terrible. Like, I feel like when our banks become our morality system, we've got problems. I get that we're trying to like stop people from making money selling drugs, but you know what? They could legalize drugs and then they could distribute them and do things like that. And I'm not saying it's going to make it any better, but I think that it can help. Anyway, so if they seize the means of production of drug making and make them pure so that people aren't dying of fentanyl overdoses, for example, or help people to overcome their mental problems that have led to some of these people being on drugs in the first place, that might also be helpful. I don't mean to go off on that. So, well, thank you very much, folks. I do appreciate that. So let's go back to hypnosis, shall we? So I was, I'm going to ask if there's anything in particular you guys wanted to talk about in hypnosis terms today. Would you like to try to stay awake and we can give you some suggestions? I mean, I kind of think that the stopping in place one earlier could have been that. So maybe your brain would like to, think about what other suggestions you might want to stay awake for, to take in unconsciously even while you're fully awake. If your unconscious mind is the kind that has been, like, if you are not a good subject already, I often say it's because people's conscious selves act like the CEO, right? This is my metaphor. So your conscious self acts like the CEO, and then your unconscious is like the mailroom and the maintenance and doing all that stuff, right? But the CEO is making decisions that affect everybody, except your unconscious is doing all the stuff that keeps everything going. Like, CEO sets the direction, your unconscious just does all the work to get you there, right? But at some point in time, if your CEO thinks that they run everything, and starts telling your unconscious what it can and cannot do, that's when I think people have a real problem getting into the state of trances and having suggestions work the way they expect them to. So, if you are that kind of person, I think that it's just good to remember that it's not bad to do that, but that CEO is not appreciating the maintenance and the mailroom. And you need to do that because you want messages to flow. You want to be able to adjust things that aren't working for you. And if you're only starting at the top and you're not doing anything under the surface, you're probably not going to get all the results that you want. So let's think about something that, your unconscious mind does. Thank it for that, praise it for that. I've said that before. I'm going to say it again and again and again because I really believe, like as a hypnotist, I am often thanking the unconscious of the person I'm working with. I'm doing my talking to the unconscious because I think the unconscious does more amazing stuff than the conscious self can possibly ever realize. And you don't want to be that under or unappreciated employee, right? You don't want any part of you to be unappreciated. So thank it. And even if your conscious self thinks that they're running the show, they can't possibly run it all. So just accept that and just go with it. Write suggestions on your unconscious mind. I love to do that sort of thing. Maybe, you know what I really like doing? I really like when people write on their body. I cleaned my space earlier this week because I wanted to put the mic in here. And I just took everything out and I put everything back in. And now I have absolutely the bare minimum in here, and that includes no pens. So, but if you have a pen, if your unconscious takes a while to respond to suggestions, that's okay. Because as soon as it does respond to a suggestion, you can say, thank you. I wonder if you can do it faster next time. And then do the same suggestion and see if you can respond faster. There's no reason your unconscious mind can't respond instantly. Like if we touch a hot stove, we get the message instantly that we should probably not do that again, right? So your unconscious mind can learn to respond to the suggestions you've been given really quickly. Now, what if you were given a suggestion and it wasn't appropriate for that time, but you really wanted to follow it later? Then that would be a great example of why you might want a delayed response to a suggestion. Like you see a billboard and you're like, oh my God, I want that for dinner, whatever that happened to be. But it's, like, I don't know, 12:30 and you just ate lunch. So, you might want to follow that up at 6 o'clock at night or something at a time that actually works for you when you're going to be hungry again. Or maybe you're driving and you get a suggestion and you're like, well, now's not the best time for that. So that is absolutely okay for your brain to be like, that's a great delayed suggestion. But if your suggestion is to go into trance now, if your suggestion is to feel more pleasure now and it's safe and appropriate to do so, just let it happen. Let your unconscious mind know, hey, if it is safe and appropriate to do this suggestion, follow along. If it's not, we'll save it for later. So, let's see. So, I don't know, all hypnosis is not categorized as sex work by banks, but a lot of it is, and that is unfortunately problematic. It's just super challenging to fight. There's, across the U.S., at any rate, which is where I am, there is a conservativization of a lot of things going on right now. And despite the fact that that is not the majority of the people in the country, there are enough people in positions of power and authority who are very conservative and want to put a kibosh on a lot of different things. For example, I don't know all the details about this, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to say things like, Pornhub is not in Texas anymore. I don't care about that. I'm not in Texas. I'm not a big Pornhub watcher. But there are people who very much care, and I bet that people in Texas are now using a lot more VPNs. So anyway, there's different kinds of things. So what kinds of suggestions do you want to do? Like, what's a suggestion that someone can toss out that you think might be fun for the group to do on themselves? So I will tell you, one of my favorite fun suggestions that's really suitable for all audiences is, for example, what if you wrote on your finger, you wrote boop. Did you know he's going to do that? You probably knew he's going to do that, right? And so when you think about it, like that's a finger, and like anytime you might notice that finger, you might just go like this. You don't have to make the sound. Like I have no shame for that, obviously. So boop. And I think so. Actually, we do it to the cat, so it's kind of cute. Yes, BOOP. Um, so forget a single digit number. That's great. Like we can also do that. So either or, I will do both of those. So for example, how about for today only? If you want to carry a suggestion over for longer, that is absolutely your prerogative. Please remember to take the suggestion in the spirit in which it's intended, for your brain to learn something, for you to have fun with it, for it to be a gateway to doing other things, a jumping off point, whatever. So if you want, you can write boop on any finger you please, whichever one. I got 10. I don't know how many you have, but pick a finger, and then you can write boop on it. And then when you find yourself, thinking about it, your brain can just go, oh, that message will either disappear into your skin or it'll get washed off, but it'll get washed into your brain. So you can just go boop anytime really easily, just like that. So, and you can feel how nice that is to have that suggestion. Boop, right? It's kind of fun. It's kind of playful. You're not my cat. I'm not my cat. But the cat, when I stick my finger out, the cat brings her nose over and she boops herself. So it's kind of cute. So that's what I think about when I think about that. I think it's like fun, playful, fun suggestion. So so here's the thing about forgetting numbers. Some people that are really into math may not like that. So you can also, if you're a math person, you can substitute a letter of the alphabet. It doesn't really matter, right? Like if you're a super Englishy literature involved, you could forget a number. You could forget something else. You could forget your name, but you don't have to. Like it's just a fun little test thing, right? So your brain can think about how there is a number that you don't even think about most of the time. Like there might be other numbers that you have preferences for, or you like, or you use all the time. But there's probably at least one number that your conscious and unconscious mind barely think about, rarely use, and maybe there's a letter that's the same thing, right? And so, thank you very much for sharing that. That is super cute. Every time you say boop, she's doing the cutest squeak and has to wipe it off her nose. Like that, thank you. So if there's a number that you don't use very often, if there's a letter that you don't think about, same thing with a number, whichever one, pick one or the other. But your unconscious mind can, when I count to 3 and snap my fingers, just let it be completely wiped out of your conscious awareness, understanding. Like you could use it in a sentence, in a word. But if you were to do the alphabet or count from 0 to 10, for example, that word, or 0 to 9, that word, that number, that letter, whatever, would not be there. So you couldn't say the number for the letter. You couldn't, spell, write, however you want to do it. So you couldn't write this down. You couldn't speak it. So your brain would just be like, I don't know, there's something here, but I don't know. Like maybe everything just looks absolutely correct. And if you were going to count, you just count normally and just skip over that and it'd be totally fine. If you were going to count your fingers, you might have 11 of them because that's a normal number, right? And if you're going to otherwise say the alphabet, whatever that letter was, you just be like, not there. I don't know. I got them all in there. They're clearly all 25 letters of the alphabet. I just said them all. So don't ask those other people to count them though, because that might get confusing. Maybe it would be perfect. Maybe there would be 26 if they counted them for you. Who knows? Okay, so on the count of 3, when I snap my fingers, you can forget. You can just let go of a number or a letter, and then you can try to write down what those are, what all the letters are from beginning to the end, and what all the numbers are from beginning to the end. Just in those single digit numbers, just the one alphabet. If you use a different alphabet than mine, that's totally fine. Write down your own. And then we'll see what happens. So 1, 2, 3, just like that. And now as you find yourself, you might be counting from whatever to whatever. You might be saying the alphabet out loud, right? If I was to say it out loud, would you say the same things that I would? So let's do this together. I will say the numbers because they're shorter, and I'll start with that first. And then we'll do my alphabet. And then you can follow along and see if there was anything that you missed. You can see if there's anything that did or did not work for you. But here we go. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So if you were letting go of a number, did you get to 11? Were you counting your fingers or were you writing things down? What happened? What did you do? And then we'll do the alphabet next time. We'll just see how well your unconscious mind is at following the instructions, at letting go of things when you're wide awake, at playing around with how much fun it can be for your unconscious self to be in charge and to go from there. Very nice. I forgot the 4. I'm still delighted by the boop, by the way. Those are really nice. So I forgot the 4. I have 11 fingers. When you said my number, it felt like gibberish. Those are really great examples of the way that our brains do different things. Okay, so let's go on. Before you remember those, because you're not, just keep forgetting that for right now. Let's go on and do the alphabet. So I'm going to say my alphabet, and you tell me what happens. You can count them if you want, but see what happens. If you read up a few lines, you can see what boop does. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z, or Z for my UK folks. So, did any of you not have a letter, or have a letter that I didn't, or do something completely different? How did that work? I'm still charmed by that. I think that's very sweet. Thank you for saying that. So B, I'm going to say that you're very good at just forgetting them all together. So, and to be fair, we have been doing hypnotic, I have been doing hypnotic-y things and language while we've been here, right? But it doesn't always mean that your brain is going to, forget everything in the way that somebody else does, which I think is absolutely fascinating. Okay, it worked well. Good. Thank you for sharing. I'm glad that that worked well. So I'm going to make sure now that you have all of your letters and numbers back where they belong, as they should be, in a way that's going to be useful for you. So if you had boop written on your finger, you can keep that or let it go as you please. I may say that again. You may or may not be here. If you do, thank you for letting me share that with you, because it feels very good. That's a really interesting way. First, my brain made the earlier number a letter, and this time it made the letter the number from before. That's an interesting way to switch it. I like that a lot. So, yeah, so think about the way that your brain responds to these different things, right? Because they're not always going to be the same. Like, we've had several different, varied, and different responses here in the chat, and I think that it's really good for us to understand that there isn't a right way to do it, that your brain and somebody else's brain can be very different, and yet you still achieve a similar result. That's kind of fascinating. And now I can sort of visualize what that's like in my head, which is kind of cool. And think about the way that your unconscious mind just really enjoys like holding on to those suggestions and just really has a good time playing around with that sort of thing. Now, I like so one of the most common questions in the hypnosis subreddit is, and I think we try to discourage this, but one of the most common questions is, how do I forget my ex? Right? Like that's not what hypnosis is going to be all about. You can do things that say eliminate phobias. You can do things that change the way you feel about someone or something. And I would suggest reducing the emotional response you have to a traumatic ex, or an ex that was bad for you in some ways, that will allow you to move on. Like in almost everything, the further away we move it from it, the better we feel. We can look back at a thing and it doesn't affect us. PTSD is different. A fast phobia cure can sometimes work on PTSD type trauma and problems. Not always, but it can be very helpful sometimes. So the way that your brain can process any or all of these things is just like a learning thing. So your brain just learns that it can do more and more and more, that you have the capacity to adjust the way you think and change your behaviors based on that. And I think it's so powerful when we can think about something in a new way than we've thought about it before, because it gives us the freedom to realize that what we thought before may or may not have been true, but even if it was true, we don't have to keep thinking that thing as we move forward. And I think those are really useful. So I've been here for about an hour. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here with me. I want to thank, I want to thank all of you. I really appreciate your participation. If you want to support me in any way, please subscribe to my channel. I am trying to do live streams every Sunday, although there is a Sunday coming up in a couple weeks that I will not be here. But if you want to become a member, you can. You can join my Patreon. You can go to my website. You can look at files there. You can always reach out to me. I am not doing live sessions right now, but I hope to pick this up later in the year. But have a great day. I'm so thankful that you are all here. And I will speak to you all later. It may take me a minute to stop this stream, but that's my own computer's fault. So thanks very much, folks, and it was delightful to see you all again. Thank you so much for participating. And I don't know if you're still here, but one last boop.